Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ProgCast. I'm Gregg Bendian, your host, where we are always looking backwards, forwards, and straight ahead whenever we are talking about music on this program. And we like to bring you the classics, and we like to bring you the fresh and up and coming on the ProgCast. And today is no exception. We have with us some very talented, very interesting young musicians who are from the New York, New Jersey area. We have Ben and Quinn Coniguiaro, and we have Matt Stober, who is also known as my collaborator in Made of Water and the producer of the podcast you're watching right now. So he won't be doing any production while we talk to him in his guise as guitarist for the band that we have today, In-Dreamview. So In-Dreamview is here. We're also going to talk about side projects of these guys. These guys are out there killing it. They're out there doing so much stuff. It would make your head spin. And it's all coming from a progressive, leaning arena of music making. And we love that here on the ProgCast. So how you doing, guys?
Good. Thanks for having us on, Greg. Big fan of the program here.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thank you very much. Like I said, we're both we're fans of both of you guys, big fans in a way. So
yeah,
this is gonna be fun.
Right on, Quinn. So where should we start? Because there's so much to talk about. But I one of the things I would like to start with is Matt Stober. You, for many years, were doing your own thing at home, all DIY. You're playing all the instruments. You're calling it In-Dreamview. We've had long conversations now for years because, full disclosure, Matt and I met when Matt was my composition and arranging student and a production student at William Paterson University. But he was already well into doing and releasing his own music before I met him. So that's always nice to see, you know, a young musician who's doing it themselves. It's all we could do back in the 80s, so we did it that way, and so that spirit still survives. So Matt was doing In-Dreamview records, in-Dreamview, and putting his own stuff up on Bandcamp, like way ahead of the curve. Probably one of the first people I knew that was aware of Bandcamp several years ago. So at that point, Matt, you were doing all the instruments yourself?
Yeah, for the most part, I had most things were up to me to do, but I had a couple tracks where I had some other drummers. I had a friend in high school who we would just kind of jam, and that's when I really started recording stuff. And so on some of the earliest stuff, there is a couple tracks with a different drummer. And then once I started getting more used to recording on my own, I started trying to play drums more. And then so there was a couple albums where it is all just me, and then a couple where it's mostly me, and then maybe one person playing drums on another track. And then, you know, I'm lucky that I eventually got to meet up with these guys, and now they're doing, you know, the stuff that I could never do as far as rhythm section. So
yeah, the style of music is I don't know, how would you describe it, Matt?
Well, it's all instrumental, and it's influenced by a lot of older movements and newer movements. So there's a lot of composers that it's influenced by, like the Debussy type influence, and then newer movements in rock music like post rock and like jazz rock, jazz fusion, whatever you want to call it. And then like math rock too, which is more like rhythmically complex with time signatures and stuff. So it loosely is instrumental music. I'm not really too sure what to call it, really.
Fusion. It's fair to say fusion. I'd say it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's a fusion of a bunch of different stuff. It's kind of a mixture.
I think either way, it has a kind of stylistic fluidity. All the albums that you've made, whether you had a few other musicians on there or not, some of the albums where it is just you, it's like to the listener, it all kind of comes off as this, I guess, overall sort of dreamy. It was always hard to put a genre down to it because it's
very
a little
ethereal.
bit of everything.
Stober definitely has a distinct compositional style where, for us at least, we know when we're hearing his stuff.
We were fans first before
Right,
anything.
right.
So
Basically the story is that we were posting our music in the same places on the internet around the same time, like 2015 roughly, when we each put out like our first stuff. So that's how we found each other, and like sites like SoundCloud and stuff. We just started messaging back and forth, sending each other music, and we were both very intrigued by what we did. Even though it was different, we both were became fans of each other slowly.
It's interesting what can happen with the internet now.
Oh yeah.
Musicians can connect. And, the international perspective of this, which is that In-Dreamview and Made of Water get a response in the UK. And, Sun Colored Chair, your side project, gets noticed in Italy. And
exactly, yeah.
So this is the way that I was going to say supposed to work, but it used to work that way, where, certain markets would get what you're doing before other markets did. So Genesis, Gentle Giant, yes, all hit in Italy first. I don't know if you guys knew that.
No, right, yeah.
It's like basically New York, Italy, and Quebec. we're always going to be the first, 3 places where people would get what you're doing. But that being said, you Coniguiaro brothers grew up in a very interesting musical situation, which maybe you could tell the listeners about.
Yeah, our dad was always a musician, and music was always around the house growing up. We heard a fair share of, Zappa, Beefheart, Genesis, the Beatles, obvious stuff like that. Yeah, sure, Sun Ra, tons of stuff. Our dad was kind of he had very eclectic taste, and we were just along for the ride basically. So
we got lucky.
Yeah, not everybody has the same set of circumstances, but from toddler age, we were hearing we're only in it for the money and Traumatic Replica, and it became kind of no question after a while. It was just part of life in a way, part of growing up.
Yeah, well, we really do have our father to thank for the exposure, not only in terms of what we would listen to from a young age, but our live experience. When we started playing, really, the first band was with him. It was like a little family funk combo, and it was really fun, the stuff we would get into, because the influences from all 3 of us were wide enough to, let us explore.
Yeah, he was a bass player himself, and he was did some touring and stuff in the 90s. So that kind of basic musicianship rubbed off on us, and we just kind of took it and ran with it further and further. As the internet developed, we started discovering music on our own and just finding the things that were really the comfort music to us over the years.
Right.
So that's interesting, because once you have a foundation of what is hip or what is interesting and what engages your brain cells, what you go out and then find and bring back. I mean, my son, who's around your age, has turned me on to all the hippest, latest stuff. And I bet you do that for your dad now.
Occasionally. Actually, it's the other way around sometimes. He's the one showing us new stuff.
He's always on it.
And we're the ones going back to all the music we missed over the years.
Well, there's a lot of catching up to do, as I've spoken to Stober about over the years. I mean, you guys got a head start. My kid got a head start. When that's the only stuff that's being played in the house, then you don't even really realize you're being, turned on to a whole other world of thinking, a whole other world of imagining sound, a whole other world of
corrupted, if you will.
Yeah, but just also the idea of individualism, that you're exposed to individuals.
Right, yeah.
What I call American, not always American, but rugged individualists who go and do their thing and don't give a shit and just do their thing because this is what I'm interested in. That's what I like about you guys. That's what I like about the young artists that are still going out there and doing it. Like if we talk about Ben's side project, Wippy Bonstacks, which everyone should check out on Bandcamp. it's an amalgam of all of these different things, including our buddy Mike Keneally, who's yet another figure that was sort of next gen after the Zappa era. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
so it's like, what are we going to do after Frank's gone that Frank would find interesting? What are we going to contribute? And Mike was the answer to that. My early chamber jazz groups were certainly a response to Zappa. I tortured those musicians. They hate me to this day for the bass parts I wrote. So, you know, this is the thing. It's like you are what you are exposed to. You are sort of probably genetically predisposed to like that. I've always said that to my son. It's like, I think you're genetically predisposed to like this stuff, but here it is anyway, you know?
You know, I was going to say, I am surprised, though, that the Zappa influence is popping up in so many places, because for the longest time, I thought it was just us, you know? And you come to find as you get older, and that's one of those artists that always keeps coming back. No matter how much you go explore outward, there's just so much within his catalog.
You never get to it all.
Yeah, I have nothing but respect for all the whole, you know, Zappa alumni, Keneally especially. So,
Yeah.
And I hear that Mike Keneally has some respect for Ben Coniguiaro as well.
Yeah, as of recently, that was quite the honor bestowed upon me, because he heard some of the stuff. We had like exchanged a few emails, and I showed him, the Wippy Bonstack stuff, and seemed like he was digging it. So it was nice of him to respond in that way. He had me on his live stream for his Patreon followers, and everybody was really digging it, because he just played some of my music. So that was really nice of him to do that. He didn't have to do that. It's just because, you know,
proud moment.
It's just because he's genuinely a fan of music. You know what I mean? He genuinely digs deep into it. Because even people, you know, like Frank, for example, who you know, didn't necessarily go out of his way to listen to pop music or discover new things that were happening. I mean, occasionally he you know, had he liked, you know, Gentle Giant and stuff like that. And Alan Holdsworth, right? Yeah. So, but Mike's kind of the opposite.
Mention those two,
right? Exactly. Yeah.
People who know find that really interesting. He's like, well, I like Gentle Giant, and I listen to Alan. Who are you listening to now? Alan Holdsworth.
Right. But besides that, it did, you know, he didn't branch out too far as to try to avoid association and stuff. But Mike's the opposite, because he just is a huge music fan and loves like pretty much everything. You know, everything that I love, I'm always very thrilled to find out he also loves. You know, like Henry Cowell, for example, and you know, Fred Frith. That whole line of everything is that's a big part of our influence too, musically.
Yeah, Art Bears. You know, I mean, the European thing is huge. I think even understanding the Japanese scene and groups like the Boredoms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Super important to kind of deal with an international perspective, even if you are from, you know, Saugerties, New York. It's like everybody should know what has been thrown down, what gauntlets have been thrown down in the music, and you kind of go, well, what am I going to do about that? You know, I guess I better practice.
You're talking international too. I think Ruins is a good example.
Ruins is another one.
Yoshida.
Right. Yeah. I've always loved, you know, music from Japan, music from Brazil. I have an obsession with. There's just so much stuff, you know, diverse, not just musically and genrematically, but culturally as well. It's just like there's so much good music all over the world. You can't really be exclusionary to one specific area. I mean, there's so much good stuff all over.
Do you guys know? I don't know if I've told this to Matt, but I was one of the first people to play free jazz in Brazil.
Yeah, we heard about the was that with Naked City era? Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a tour of Brazil with Cecil Taylor Unit, of which I was the drummer, William Parker on bass, and then it was Naked City, Max Roach Quartet, Horace Silver Quintet, and the Count Basie Big Band, and that was like the package. And people didn't know what to make of free jazz when they heard it live, because they were in Brazil. They're about 10 years behind in terms of what recordings were available to them, because
Right.
there weren't like great music stores all over Brazil. So they passed cassettes around to each other. So there was like a cassette thing that happens in a culture where they're sharing music the best way they can, but they had Weather Report, but they didn't really have like the Cecil stuff or the Ornette stuff or Derek Bailey. So when we played there, people freaked out, kind of not in a good way at first, and then they got into it more. It's interesting when people are not exposed to the avant-garde and they hear it, what are they responding to? Because they're not responding to, oh, this is a version of that, or this is a new iteration of this concept. It's like they're just hearing abstract sound for the first time. I mean, what is that? That's such an interesting question.
Yeah.
Like Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Well, and also on YouTube, I always like to plug this. On YouTube, if you put premiere of Edgar Varese Des Airs, it was recorded by Yannis Anakis in the booth at the hall, and you can hear the audience just freaking out over the new Varese piece, because it's on a program with Mozart and
right, yeah, It's just the direct visceral impact, basically,
Right at that moment, because half of the audience is cheering, half of the audience is booing, and it's like,
yeah.
Well, great things take time. I've always felt that.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, you don't know. You don't know what
exactly.
You don't know what it is when you're on top of. You can't see the forest for the trees. You're in the tree. You're looking at a tree. You're looking at a small group of trees. You think you understand what the forest is. I'm not so sure. So yeah, it's great that because Mike Keneally and I have been working on and off together for, I want to say 22 years maybe. We met at the Bottom Line when the Mahavishnu Project was opening for Beer for Dolphins in 2001, and we were recording stuff a year later. That's going to come out now on his next album.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But we recorded on top of things we started recording 20 years ago. So, the process for you guys is like, that was one process where we're recording on top of things we'd already recorded. What is your process for recording in Dreamview now?
I'll let Stober take that.
Yeah, we started recording with this lineup in 2020, I guess, right? And then so how we've been doing it is we'll track drums and bass at the same time, so you have that kind of live performance aspect to it. And then after the fact, we'll overdub guitars and vibraphone.
You don't play with them when they're playing?
I'll play as like a scratch track, but we won't. That's just for kind of reference and stuff.
Yeah, so it's all live. Usually the rhythm tracks are live. No click track or anything. It's just a pretty genuine live performance. And we'll do about 3 or 4 takes, and then Matt decides what the best stuff to use is.
So are you guys given like demos before? Like, Matt, you're writing all the stuff, I assume.
We're in Dreamview, yeah. But these guys always kind of, what I like about working with these guys is they'll add their own embellishments and fills and stuff, and that really brings it to a level that it wasn't at before. So
sometimes there's a demo, but not always.
Yeah, so I actually
play as the song.
More recently, I just kind of threw something at them where I showed them the song, and then the next day we were recording it. And usually I'll give them a demo, or we'll practice stuff a weekend before and then come back and record it. But we've been speeding up the process a bit.
Let's say with some of these demos, it's like, I think at first it's a good reference, but I think at first you're skeptical to show us because you want us to kind of develop our own interpretation of it.
Right. You don't want us to hear
I admire that
bias or whatever.
And because I want these guys to add their own thing to it, sometimes like if I recorded a demo with my drum playing, I don't want that to influence what he'll play, because I'm limited, on the drum aspect. So
In like MIDI usage, you got to interpret MIDI sometimes.
Sometimes I'll use MIDI, but yeah, usually it's demos are pretty helpful most of the time, but I like introducing the songs in the same room. Usually that's how I like to kind of introduce the stuff.
So that's a good way of working, so everybody's kind of involved pretty early on in the game.
Yeah.
How much do things develop over that period of time between initial exposure to recording?
I think once the other overdubs start getting put on, it gets a little bit more clear what a track needs. And sometimes I'll be leaning into maybe like a bass part that Quinn played. I might double that on glockenspiel or something. And so stuff like that happens over time after more overdubs get put on. And sometimes you realize there's, the room for something else, or there's too much and you might have,
and much of the time, Stober does have these ideas for drums. He'll be like, could you play this certain way or play this type of beat, or maybe lay off the hi-hat or the ride cymbal in this part and play just on the drums, like just stuff like that. He'll have general suggestions or just like a vision of what he wants. So it's not like we don't totally come up with the parts completely, because there is some bit written, but you know how it is. You add your little kind of flair to it and your personality. Being a player, you just have to kind of adapt around the song and just work those things into it.
Yeah, I try to give them the framework that I have in mind, and then leave room for what I know that they will add that's going to enhance it.
The other thing we should mention too is there's another member of In-Dreamview who's not here right now, but yeah, Alex Verbickas. So you mentioned Sun Colored Chair. That's just our band with this guitarist Alex Verbickas, but he's also in In-Dreamview. So like the entire Sun Colored Chair lineup is embedded within the In-Dreamview lineup, and it is kind of relevant to say that when we formed Sun Colored Chair, we were already all big fans of In-Dreamview and what Stober does. It just definitely like kind of clicked. It was a very satisfying, when those bands linked up, it was a very satisfying experience.
I always think for a while we wished we could be the band for In-Dreamview.
Yeah, we were just the number one fans, and then eventually we turned into being the guys in the band. So it worked out.
It's nice when things work out.
Yeah, it was definitely because his music was, influencing us in ways that we were kind of like trying to filter into finding our own sound and our own style, which is like also an instrumental band that's like guitar based music. So writing from the guitar perspective, and then thinking about what you could do with voicings and chords and arpeggios and polychords and stuff like that. That kind of all that influence came more or less from, listening to all different music throughout our lives and prog rock and everything, but also just Stober. It was just a simple thing. Like some of the concepts that he was doing in his recordings were enough to, really just have an impact on us. Yeah. So that was definitely, between like In-Dreamview and Deerhoof, those were pretty much the biggest influences on Sun Colored Chair when we started. Those were like the biggest pushes for us.
See, but I have to take you guys back to the fact that Andy Partridge points out that anything XTC did was basically trying to find ways of making two guitars, bass, and drums sound interesting.
Yeah.
XTC
in a post Beefheart world. And I think that's sort of a really interesting assessment of what you're up against. I mean, you're up against post Trout Mask, two guitars, bass, drums.
Yeah. A guitar A and B, if you could come up with arrangements that are, interesting for that setup, then you've succeeded in some way.
And then how does the bass figure in? And then how does the drum part figure in as a voice in the music rather than just there to keep the beat? It's like all these questions that get raised by Trout Mask, where like, what are you going to do with two guitars, bass, and drums, and then maybe saxophone or bass clarinet or voice on top, maybe? But it is really interesting because you guys, like me, enjoy putting tune percussion in things. And that's so much we, again, in a post Zappa Gentle Giant world, if I can, I will. You know what I mean? Like that, if if there's a xylophone part possible, there's going to be a xylophone part. Nobody else seems to be really that interested in it. I mean, like how many people are following that? I mean, yes, Ruth was an intimidating figure in the music. I think that should be made clear. Ruth, the great Ruth Underwood. Ruth, please, I would love to have you on the program. You can talk
If you're watching this.
Hear the call.
talk about notes. Yeah, so these guys like me, like all of these things are on the table. And I like that because while you could say it's a kind of progressive rock music, it's more than that. And I was really impressed with Ben on your solo album Wippy Bonstack, that so much singing and vocalizing going on. What
Yeah. Well, I mean, as much as we were influenced by, instrumental music and modern composition and prog and jazz and all that stuff, I was just as much influenced by pop music growing up, if not more, in a way that is what got me started making music, was songwriting. Basically, the ability. I mean, I played drums from a very young age, so I always kind of had that rhythmic ability in the pocket. But once I got to be like 14 or something, I noticed like a lot of my favorite artists were one-man bands, Todd Rundgren, something, anything era. Yeah, stuff like that. It was really starting to drill into me. I'm like, well, I should really learn how to play all the instruments and sing and all that stuff. If I'm going to, if I'm inspired by this is the type of thing that I'm going to want to do. I said I was probably like freshman in high school. I like 14. So that's when I started getting, really heavily into songwriting, having something be a successful song, and even not always being the most conventional. Just sometimes, you just let your imagination kind of take you and applying like more creative, progressive mentality to pop structures and stuff. So obviously, yeah, like, Todd, XTC, I always have loved, 70s stuff, Joni Mitchell, Steely Dan, all that stuff. Even Gentle Giant, being a prog band, is very songwriter-ish, and their ability to have, good hooks and all that stuff. It plays into it for sure. Yeah, we can go on. There's so many artists that are like, they blend those worlds, like instrumental virtuosity, but also just like nice, catchy songs that you could sing along with.
If I could, I was going to bring it back to Deerhoof, because they're one of those really pivotal, essential bands, and they're the absolute perfect mix of completely weird and musical, but also, laid back and normal, and gives you that essence of the tune that you can relate to. And even though, they have a very distinct kind of sound with their vocals, and, it's like you talked about, how do you fit everything in post Beefheart world? Sometimes when it feels like everything's been done, they're a band that, to me, it always comes back as a comfort, a relatability in the sound. And I would love to do anything to come close to what they do with composition in a kind of almost more pop way.
And the guitarist in Deerhoof, remind me his name?
There's two of them, Ed Rodriguez and John Dietrich.
Well, Ed Rodriguez is a big Derek Bailey fan.
Exactly, yeah. I think they both are. And I'm pretty sure John studied under Fred Frith, too, at Mills College.
Right. So Fred recently retired from teaching at Mills, and had an impact on so many musicians. And that's just one example. As a teacher, teaching a kind of wide open view of music. Nothing wrong with that, because there's certainly plenty of people that are nailed down onto one type. So, why not do it your own way? You only live once.
Yeah, but just even like a quick note, like you just said, Derek Bailey and all that stuff is kind of embedded. Those two guitar players were in a couple bands, but they were in a group in the 90s called Gorge Trio, and just their work together, they have a certain language and chemistry on guitar. Again, I'm talking about two guitar players that has deeply inspired definitely us, as well as, I know I could say Stober too. Like that stuff has been a big impact on like our writing style, thinking about writing music on a fretboard, two fretboards, and seeing the possibilities of what kind of arrangements you can make with that.
And they go above and beyond with the kind of classical complexity of, a song like Look Away. If I could ask John or one of the members from that band how they wrote it, that's what I would ask about, is that song. It's particularly mind-blowing.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of like guitarists that I played with Derek Bailey. So guitarists with Derek Bailey that I played with, one of them was Jim O'Rourke.
Yep.
And it was Derek on electric and Jim on acoustic. in
Yeah.
Chicago back in the 90s. I have a recording of that. And then Derek and Pat Metheny, which was insane. But yeah, I mean, the true guitar thing, I mean, I've been a guitar geek my whole life, you know. I mean, it's like almost all the projects I do have guitar, unless they're completely different acoustic chamber kind of projects. I do include a lot of guitar. Um, and I always feel like that the relationship between the guitar and the drums is super important. The relationship between the drums and percussion and the rest of the band. These are things that all come from Frank and come from Gentle Giant for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really good to know guitar stuff because although we're a rhythm section, we both play guitar, so there's always a lot of guitar involved. And in terms of stylistic strength, Stober's got one of the most clean, pure, like awesome, unique guitar sounds that I've ever heard. Kind of reference from, you can feel a little bit of Nels Cline in there, a little bit of Bill Frisell in there. So definitely thankful to be involved with that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's big interest in Nels Cline, and 25 years ago we were recording Interzone records and doing Interstellar Space Coltrane stuff, and now he's the guitarist in Wilco, and he's known for his jazz work as well. So, you know, it's interesting how you guys are so on top of all the stuff that's going on, and I gotta say that's great. It's the way to be. You know, you got to stay on top of what's happening. You got to stay on top of what has happened, and it feeds you. It feeds the imagination. It feeds
I think
the
with,
whole
with
process.
every artist you find, there's a list of other artists attached. So, you know, Nels Cline, Jim O'Rourke,
Right.
Derek Bailey, any of these names, there's a whole other chapter with all these other people that connect. It's a tree of music. So if you're willing, if you have the time and you're willing to explore it, you know, and I'm sure Stover could talk about that because he explores a lot more almost than we do, I think.
Oh yeah.
I mean, yeah, speaking of Nels, I mean, Alex Klein is a huge influence also lately. But yeah, there's always, whether it's their influence or who they worked with, there's always a huge interconnected thing with all these artists that kind of can keep you busy for a long time with this kind of music.
We call that the Blue Note process in our little world, which is that back in the day, the way jazz fans would collect jazz records is Blue Note would have a leader, and on the Wayne Shorter record there'd also be McCoy Tyner and Elvin Jones, and people would say, "Oh, who are they?" And then they would get their own records, and then be McCoy record.
Exactly.
Then you get a McCoy record, then you get an Elvin record, then and it just goes like that.
Yeah, like dominoes. But if we could take a second, I was going to say I admire, you talk about drum styles and certain work that you've done. I actually really admire a lot of the different stuff. One thing that sticks out is the work you did for Zoot Horn Rollo on the album. Was it
We Saw a Bozo,
We Saw a
Under the
Bozo
Sea.
Under the Sea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
love
a great
that.
album.
Relocating Dirt.
And Interzone stuff too. Obviously, that's classic. The story behind how we actually found Gregg Bendian music, Gregg Bendian's Interzone, was just our dad's friend had like loaned us just a flash drive of music, just like a couple of albums, and it was just on there. It was Requiem for Jack Kirby was just on there, and it caught our attention. We were like, this is interesting.
It stuck out the most out of all the stuff on that drive.
Right, for sure. We were into it. But then the mind-blowing thing was, whatever, a couple, like 2 or 3 years later, we had already known Stober and his music, but to find out that you guys were connected and that he was your student and that you guys had this project Made of Water together that was happening, that was like a huge mind-blowing moment because, Stober, we were just texting and stuff back in the day, and he was like, oh yeah, my professor, he's worked with Zoot Horn Rollo and also did this triple free jazz album, Sign of Four, and I was like, whoa, wait, are you talking about Gregg Bendian? I know that guy. So that was a big light bulb moment that kind of brought linked these things together that I never realized were meant to be. But yeah,
it's funny. This makes it a little world that we live in. It's a small world that we live in. When those who are interested in these kinds of things, it's like when Stober came to me as a student, he was probably the first student I knew who I didn't have to say, oh, you know who Bill Frisell is? Do you know who Zoot Horn Rollo is? I think, he already knew the the Keneally Wooden Smoke album, which was sort of my breakthrough with Mike. Requiem for Jack Kirby and Wooden Smoke came out in the same year.
Right. Yeah.
Like we
Yeah,
were already like he went one way, I went another, and we're just fans of each other's work. But the idea that you heard the Zoot record, I mean that record has come back to me more than any in some ways, because it's just such a, well, I mean, Beefheart fans either love it or don't like it because they think it's supposed to be Beefheart, and it's not.
Right.
It's
It's
Bill
not, yeah.
Harkleroad's world of composition, which includes guys like Holdsworth and Frizzell and Townsend and all the great guys, So Bill was not going to produce a Beefheart record. He wasn't making it for the Beefheart fans. He was making it. Well, actually, and he's been on the ProgCast, and he'll probably come back because we're very, very, very tight. He came to see my trio play in Eugene, the trio pianissimo with Dave Witham and Joel Hamilton, and we were playing stuff from the first record. And I met at my invitation. I said, please come to the show. I do this all the time. If I know famous musicians in town, invite them to your show. Maybe they'll come. So this gentleman comes to my show. We hit it off immediately, and I say to him, why have you never done a solo album? And he said, well, if I do a solo album, will you play on it? I said, yeah, absolutely. Just get me some tunes. And within a year, he had those 14 tunes in MIDI form, and I played my drum parts to MIDI tracks, and I overdubbed the vibraphone to MIDI tracks, and then he fleshed everything else out. And We Saw a Bozo Under the Sea is a really interesting record because it's so varied.
Yeah.
So many different approaches and so many different compositional styles. And I'm required to play loose. I'm required to play tight. I'm required to, do all these kinds of things based upon what he wanted compositionally. And thank you for mentioning that. And thank you for mentioning the Requiem record, because those are two records that I hold very near and dear to my heart. And also that are, I think, definitive statements for me. The Requiem album, I think, is the definitive statement by Interzone. And even for me, artistically drawing the comic book world and the jazz weirdo world together in 2001, when nobody gave a shit about that stuff. And now people are listening to it and thinking about it 25 years later. Have you guys heard the live Interzone recording?
Yeah, it was recently. You had it on Bandcamp recently.
Yeah, it's on there. Yeah,
that was great,
because that's really what we were like live.
Yeah,
anything could happen. I mean, it was, and everybody knew what was going to happen in the band, so we could like get loose and then boom. So yeah, Interzone with the Cline brothers and Kermit Driscoll on bass, or various. We've had so many bass players. But
that was a great lineup. I enjoyed that lineup of the group. Alex's drumming is amazing, and then it's one of those few times you'll hear Nels and Alex in the same band. It's one of my favorite versions of that they've been together in.
I kid you not. I wrote knowing they were together. So I wrote knowing the kinds of things they would do and the kinds of things that could happen. And I wrote specifically for Nels' pedal board. I knew what I could orchestrate, and I knew what he would, could do sonically. So it became, after 3 albums, Requiem, I was like, this one has steel guitar. This one I could just tell him, like, this one has clean. This one has that, and he was just like, okay, whatever you want. And that's the thing when you guys are doing what you're doing, where you're working together regularly, you develop a kind of sonic language, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially with the amount of time you play. Go ahead.
And the brother thing, I mean, let's bring it all together. We got the Cline brothers in Interzone, and we got the Coniguiaro brothers in all these other projects. And there's something about brotherly music making, isn't there?
Yeah, any sort of family process, if you share DNA, I think that just helps you to become that much tighter, that much quicker.
It's too tight. It's unfair.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's just a chemistry thing, because to develop chemistry with another musician, it might take a couple months. It might take 5 years. It might take 15 years, depending on who it is and how they, interact with the other player. But yeah, being related is definitely an advantage. And I think it just depends. If you click with somebody on a stylistic level and on like a spiritual level, then yeah, you'll be able to make music together, whether you're blood relatives or not. But that definitely brings it closer. Like him and I have virtually the same exact music taste, so that helps to be able to just understand. We know where we're coming from. We almost don't even need to say it half the time.
So I got to ask though, what do you disagree on? Music.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. The little things, the things that don't really matter. That's when we disagree. Is when it's like inconsequential or just like trivial, random bullshit. But most of the time, we can get on. Compositionally, we have been writing together for a long time, both together and separately. Like he'll have stuff, and then I'll come and add little transitions or do something, and kind of put my touch on it, or vice versa. So. Yeah.
You mentioned a musical language, the sonic language that you develop, and sometimes I think it freaks out certain people around us, because it's like you're talking another language. You're speaking in code, and a lot of the time you don't even speak. There's windows of writing and listening to music where we're so in-depthly involved, and we look up and we don't even realize we haven't said a word to each other for about a half an hour. Even longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a form of communication. It's just a different form.
I think that's why the music sometimes ends up becoming long form, and we try to cut ourselves off, but it just keeps going. You just want to, it's a musical conversation.
Yeah, you sprawl out with what you're trying to achieve.
Especially with this type of music.
One other thing we should plug is you guys have a record out on John Zorn's label, Zotic.
Initially, the project started as, that's the last record we did for Zotic. But when it started, it really was a very kind of anti-genre. It was more or less an avant-garde melting pot of all these different things. It was kind of like, sound collage and free improvisation performances that we would do that were kind of edited and, put together with some like noise and glitch elements and drone and ambient and just different things. We were just trying out all different things. So it was more or less kind of this like melting pot of just random ideas with no particular direction to it. It was kind of like soundscapes, and I got quite a mixed response from people, but I think the people who liked it understood what we were trying to do and the influences that we were, the things that we were taking from. But eventually that project started to become more focused on like replicating like more of the math rock sounds. And you mentioned like bands like Ruins and stuff like that were big, forces in pushing us to that style.
Were you guys into Hella?
Yeah, Hella, Ruins, the band Yowie, the band Breadwinner. There was a lot of just bands that were around in like the 90s to early 2000s that the stuff that they were doing, you could sometimes it gets referred to as brutal prog, like Flying Lutenbachers too. A lot of those bands were just kind of like had this captivating, polarizing effect on us. We're like, all right, well, we got to at least try to do music in this style.
Yeah, Breadwinner, Ruins.
Yeah,
Yowie.
A lot of those bands kind of pushed us more so compositionally and just to see, stylistically, is it possible for us to do this? And me as a drummer was just kind of like trying to push myself to play things that I, couldn't really even play in reality. But doing that helped our ability.
I was gonna say too, you know, there was that evolutionary path, like you talked about. We have 5 albums, and the most recent one was done on Zotic, and it has that kind of full blown brutal prog composition. But when we started, it was more like, you know, noise collage and music concrete,
right.
things
So
like that.
it started kind of as like a sound collage project, went towards the mathier 90s, 2000s mathy side, and then more recently we landed on a more of just like progressive composition sound and a little bit of influence from everything. And actually Stober does appear on this album playing vibraphone on a track, which was very nice of him to do for us.
Wow, that's cool.
You know, one term I wanted to bring up was something that I think I made up, but I don't know. But it's called EPNs, which are emotionally provoking noises, and they're things that you know, that really catch your ear. And when you're making that kind of music, and any kind of music, really, you always have to be aware of those sounds. You know.
Right. Yeah. We've always been one to you know, record, you know, like field recordings, just record the things that happen naturally around us. If we hear a sound that is emotionally provoking in some way, we will just start recording it on a phone or something.
You're out recording the bush.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Right. But it could be anything. I mean,
bush recording.
You know, we've heard like somebody's shower was malfunctioning one time,
squealing.
Making a weird squealing sound. You know, we were in the car one time and it started hailing,
trapped in a hailstorm.
Yeah, and so that was cool. So there's all these little, you know, bits, recordings, and
but it's like those are just noises. It's really how you use it, you know.
Right. So sometimes we'll work that stuff into a musical context. Sometimes it'll just be kind of noise or on its own. Just how do you know, just the abstract sound of it. So that's what that project mainly has been for, is like the way more darker and avant-garde side of things. Whereas, you know, Sun Color Chair is more like a little more accessible and a little more bright and easygoing.
But let's stay on the avant-garde for a minute, because I guess I wanted to know really if that was from your father. Was he turning you on to these things, or what, John Cage, etc., Stockhausen, or did that come on your own?
Well, yeah, a little bit of both. You know, we grew up, like I said, obviously hearing, you know, Zappa and those kind of influences, and the more modern classical stuff. But then,
Steve Reich,
more or less, as I started to discover music, like I said, on my own through the internet, I started to find a lot of the stuff that would become, you know, imperative to forming that. You know, basically every time I found a new genre, like, oh, I found out about the drone genre, or found out about industrial music, you know, it would kick off a new desire to achieve something creatively. So that's really what the Wyxz project accomplished at first, was like basically just trying to, you know, replicate different genres that I was into at the time. But yeah, a lot of those you know, names are essential in forming kind of what we did, particularly even by genre, not even necessarily by artist, but like when you think about, you know, what it took to create our first the first Wyxz album. There was a lot, you know, 90s noise rock. I mean, there was everything on that album. We definitely tried to encompass a lot of what was influencing us at the time, which happened to be mainly these avant-garde genres. A little bit less so on the modern like composition side, more so on like free music. And, you know, obviously the guys from like Henry Cow, that was always been an influence.
Also Canterbury, Soft Machine, you know, that whole realm.
Yeah. Musically and otherwise, you know, sometimes just sonically, you know, we're influenced by something just by the way it sounds, not even necessarily the music, but, you know, both have happened.
Thanks for mentioning Canterbury. We don't get a lot of that mention on this program.
It's so important.
Dave Stewart, if you're listening, I'm calling out to
National Health and just all
unbelievable. That's great stuff.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I know that the Canterbury stuff has been a big inspiration for the newest like Made of Water stuff that I'm trying to.
Which again, you know, if I could say, I'm a big fan of Made of Water and the album Hydrosphere that is already out. I love the drumming and guitar and.
Yeah, that needs a plug and a half right there. Hydrosphere is easily the best album of 2020.
New material coming soon, so hopefully, can't wait.
Yeah, we could talk about that for a minute. I mean, since Matt and I never get to talk about our projects on air, so we are working on a new album of Made of Water. It's sort of the second volume of pieces. Again, probably a concept album, right, Matt?
Yeah, it's starting to take that shape again.
I don't know what the concept is, but I think it has something to do with isolation.
Loosely,
There you
yeah.
go.
And kind of metaphors like lighthouses and people who keep them and all that stuff. Yeah.
Cool.
Stober is always very on top of the conceptual ideas of things. You know, almost all of his albums have that to them, where there's some kind of aspect of
You're telling
nature.
me? You're telling
yeah,
me
no.
this?
He's on it way more than us. We're more like just the weirdo imagination kids who just do everything randomly. You know, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to what it is that we're doing and how it's tied in.
We always made stuff up, you know, like Magma or something. You make up your own language.
Right. Yeah, in a
right.
way.
You were exposed to Magma by your dad?
No, that was something I found on my own when I found out about Rock and Opposition and all that stuff. You know, Zool. I kind of came on its own later on. I was probably a teenager when I found that stuff. But yeah, I think it's nice that Stober has the ability to have stuff conceptually knit so neatly.
Strong.
Whereas, yeah, a lot of the time we're just sprawled out with our ideas.
Well, I mean, there's two ways of doing it. I suppose there's more than two, but you know, the idea of letting your imagination go in any direction, certainly the freedom of that. But I love the focus of trying to pull things together under the banner of these are all tangentially related to X, you know, and then somehow it forces you to be really thematic. It forces you to be very clear about what you aren't doing. So it's not everything can happen. It's a certain amounts of atmospheres are plausible, or as Todd said when making Skylarking, it either falls in the circle or it's outside of the circle. And you kind of think about what's to be inclusive in it. But yeah, it's a lot of guitars. It's a lot of female voice, thanks to Chloe and to Olivia, because we're really, we're kind of going full Canterbury with this one.
Oh yeah,
very excited.
That gets me, real excited. And also, speaking of Canterbury, one thing I want to mention quick is we recently started working with this New York composer, Zachary Dietrich, who's like a composition major at Juilliard. So basically, he started just sending us music that he was making, and it's very along those lines, more so than we've ever been able to achieve, because he has access to a lot of people to do instrumentation and stuff. So he's starting to have, like xylophone and bassoon and everything. So it's getting more of that Canterbury and or RIO type sound going.
Is he aware of that stuff?
Oh yeah, he definitely influenced him a lot, as well as Zappa and stuff. So that's something we're going to be on soon. The band's called Filibuster Saloon.
You asked where he was from.
Where's he from? Yeah.
New York. He's from Manhattan, and like I said, he went to Juilliard. So basically, I think he recently graduated, and we're building his record right now. Basically, we're gonna be the ones to produce it and be the rhythm section.
He's another fellow Henry Cow buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Which we didn't know too many of up to this point, but yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
So that'll be something. So Canterbury has penetrated the walls of Juilliard. Folks, you heard it here first.
There's so few people,
There are so few, but it's happening. It's happening because of the internet. It's happening because everybody has the option to listen to everything. So In-Dreamview has a recent release. Why don't you guys tell everybody about that?
Yeah, we would just kind of meet up, go over the songs, and then record the rhythm tracks, like drums and bass and stuff. And then I would go and overdub the guitars and vibraphone and glockenspiel or whatever other overdubs. And then, we did that for, a year or so, about almost exactly a year, I think, of recording.
And the new album is called Triptych.
I know earlier we talked about Stober's ability to be conceptually strong, and this is a great example because the album is called Triptych. The album cover is a triptych, beautifully designed, and actually the songs are designed in the form of a triptych, so it's all around. Bing.
It's nice.
Yeah, again, it's like it's 9 tracks in total, and then in 3 parts, and then each part is divided into 3. So it's kind of like a fract, like self-similar on multiple scales, like a fractal or something. And yeah, that was generally the concept, was to have things in threes and lean into that. With the concepts for stuff, sometimes, well, mostly what will happen is I'll start recording a project with a very, very loose idea, and then somewhere along the lines it will solidify, and then from there I just lean into it. And that was the case for this album. Yeah, definitely.
The number of counting shall be 3, or thou shalt not count, neither count thou 5. Okay, the number 3 is huge for me as well, and this album Triptych is really cool. Everybody check it out. I highly recommend it. The new album by In-Dreamview, and it's on Bandcamp and elsewhere. Triptych by In-Dreamview. And as Frank Zappa said, it's optional entertainment. Okay. And if you take the option and you go on the internet and you find out what we're talking about when we say Canterbury, there's a whole world within a world. And then you have all the different ways of doing it, and all the different vocal styles, and all the instrumental styles, and all the approaches to improvisation, from completely free noise-based all the way up to harmonic complexity. So it's a big influence and inspiration to all of us when we talk about Canterbury, particularly on this program today when I'm with Ben and Quinn Coniguiaro and Matt Stober. And guys, it's been such a pleasure talking to you about all your projects. Where can they find you on the internet?
Well, if you want, list off some links, there's In-Dreamview, which is, Bandcamp, and all the social media and stuff you'll be able to find there. But then for our stuff, Sun Color Chair, Wyxz, Wippy Bonstack is my solo project. He's got Eyeless Owl as his solo project, and we've got a new album for that coming pretty soon. So in general, Mogul Intermissions, that's our little fake collective for all these projects. It's like a little fake net label, and we put all the albums in one place under that name. So
Bandcamp and Spotify, really.
Yeah, right. Basically, that's
some YouTube related stuff.
And Matt, you have a solo album that just came out?
Yeah, in the past couple of years, I've started to do more solo stuff. That's kind of like solo guitar performances and then ambient stuff. And then I also have a project with my friend Peter Kim called Pilot Waves. That's also on Bandcamp and Spotify. But yeah, that's some fun stuff. We do like a lot of breakbeat. So yeah, those are my side things. But the main things right now are Made of Water and In-Dreamview, really.
Always
and
fun.
We're hoping
always fun is to stand by for a Stober release. The biggest plug we could give. Stober's releases are
always the best.
Did he play you any of our roughs yet?
Yeah, we heard a little bit of it, but I kind of just kept telling him, turn it off. I don't want to hear it till it's done.
I want to hear it till it's done.
I want to be surprised. I want to be totally surprised.
It's amazing, though, what we have heard. I look forward to it.
Yeah, they don't want any spoilers.
No spoilers. Yeah. Well, it's going to have some epic stuff on it. That's one thing we're doing.
I can't wait.
And then we're doing some shorter pieces too. But yeah, Made of Water album will be out this year. We're not going to land on a date until we're ready. And what a pleasure to have you guys. And I'm so inspired by your energy, and you remind me of me when I was 20 something doing this stuff. And that's, the happiest time of my life. And this is a time to do it all. Do everything you want, do anything you want, and make it happen. And because if you don't make it happen, nobody else is going to make it happen. So go forth and do.
Yeah, we really appreciate you having us on here.
My pleasure. Really great to have you guys. And I wish, all the best with your creativity and with your work. Believe in what you're doing, man, and it'll take you far. My guests have been Matt Stober, Ben, and Quinn Coniguiaro. This has been the ProgCast. I'm Gregg Bendian. We will see you next time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye.
Take care.